For more than 1,000 years, a single military force absolutely dominated the Western world. It forged an empire that really shaped all of history that followed. We are talking, of course, about the Roman army. But how in the world did this legendary force last so long and control so much? Well, to get that, you first have to grasp the sheer scale of their operation.
Okay, so get this. At its absolute peak, the Roman Empire had a border that stretched over 7,000 kilometers. That is like drawing a line from New York City all the way to Berlin. And that entire massive line had to be defended day in and day out. And, defending a border that long, it required one of the largest professional armies in all of pre-modern history. At its height, you're looking at more than 400,000 soldiers. These are legionaries and auxiliaries, all forming a single immense war machine.
Which brings us right to the core question of this whole explainer. How did they do it? I mean, really, how did a single military manage to conquer and then hold on to an empire of this scale for centuries? The answer, as you'll see, isn't just about numbers. It's about culture, it's about economics, and it's about strategy. It all starts with the individual soldier. See, the foundation of Roman power wasn't some secret weapon or technology. It was the Roman legionary. And the state invested literally everything into building the perfect soldier. Historian Peter Heather puts it pretty bluntly. He describes the Roman military culture as being just like the Marines, but much nastier. This wasn't just a job for these guys. It was a brutal, all-consuming subculture built on absolutely fierce discipline and just relentless training. And this really gets at a fundamental difference in how they thought about fighting. Rome's enemies, people like the Gauls, they often prized the heroic individual warrior, a fighting style defined by personal bravery and these wild swinging blows. The Romans? They trained for the exact opposite. Stay in formation, trust the guy next to you, trust your shield, and use efficient, deadly stabs. It was the victory of teamwork over individual heroism every time. This incredible teamwork was drilled into them through what we now call esprit de corps. Loyalty wasn't just some abstract idea of Rome. It was to your unit, your brothers in arms. And the symbol of that loyalty was the legionary eagle. Losing that standard in battle was the ultimate disgrace, while successful units were given honors that became part of their official name for all time. But listen, it wasn't all just harsh discipline. For a lot of people, joining the army was a genuine path to a better life. I mean, it offered things that were just unheard of for the average person back then. A guaranteed supply of food, access to professional doctors, stable pay, and even a pension at the end. And this is brilliant. It also meant that literacy rates inside the army were way higher than in the general population. It was a tough life for sure, but it was a stable one. Okay, but a single soldier, no matter how well trained, is still just one person. To support 400,000 of them, you need a system, a colossal one. So let's zoom out and look at the engine that powered this whole machine. Now, this is the crucial point to understand. The Roman state existed first and foremost to fund its army. In an age before complex social services or anything like that, the military was by a massive, massive margin the single greatest expense of the entire government. To put that into perspective, just imagine the entire state budget as a pie. And this is a simplified view, of course, but the slice of that pie for the military would absolutely dwarf everything else combined. For the Roman state, funding the army was its reason for being. So that begs the obvious question, right? If the army was so expensive, how on earth did they pay for it century after century? Well, the answer lies in the very function of the army itself. For a huge chunk of its history, Rome ran on what historians now call a plunder economy. The army wasn't just a cost, it was the primary source of revenue. It's a simple, brutal cycle. You conquer new lands, you seize their wealth and resources. You use that wealth to pay the army, and then you send that army out to conquer more land. It was a self-fueling cycle of expansion. And of course, the army structure had to evolve to keep this whole thing going. It started out back in the Republic as this part-time citizen militia, fighting seasonal wars. But to really fuel that plunder economy, it had to transform into the salaried, professional, standing army of the early empire. And, as we're about to see, when that model eventually broke down, the late empire had to start relying more and more on allied and mercenary troops, which they called foederati. Now, having a massive, well-funded army is one thing. But using it effectively, that's a whole different ballgame. Rome's dominance wasn't just about brute force. It was about smart strategy and some incredible hidden advantages they had up their sleeve. Roman grand strategy was actually surprisingly complex. They preferred not to fight if they could get away with it. They would use manipulative diplomacy to create buffer zones with so-called client states. They'd install puppet rulers finally to them, and they relied heavily on just the sheer intimidation factor of their legions. Full-on conquest was often their last resort. And this right here, this is one of their biggest secrets to success. Every single Roman soldier was also a trained engineer. A core part of their training was learning to build and to build with incredible speed, a skill that turned out to be a massive strategic weapon. I mean, just think about what this really means. Wherever the legions went, they could build bridges to cross rivers nobody else could, they could build roads to speed up their own supplies, and, get this, they built a fortified camp every single night. That made them nearly impossible to surprise. This institutional skill gave them a huge, huge advantage in any territory. And all that amazing engineering fed into an unparalleled logistics network. On land, okay, a legion could march about 15 miles a day. But by sea, a realm they completely controlled, they could move supplies and men up to 5 times faster and way more efficiently. No enemy they faced could even come close to matching their ability to move and supply a large army. So if the Roman war machine was so perfect, I mean, you've got disciplined soldiers, a self-funding economy, brilliant strategy, why did it ultimately fail? Well, it turns out that the army's greatest strengths also contained the very seeds of its own destruction. The crucial turning point really came in the 2nd century AD. The empire reached its maximum size, and it just stopped expanding. And suddenly, that whole plunder economy we talked about, it ground to a halt. There was no more new wealth coming in to pay for the military. And that created this fundamental shift in the army's whole role in the state. It went from being the engine of revenue to becoming a crushing burden. The empire's tax base simply wasn't large enough to support the massive military it now had to maintain on these fixed defensive frontiers. And the costs just kept rising. The state now had to pay these huge subsidies to foreign chieftains just to keep them from attacking. The army itself actually grew larger to defend the borders, and there was a big shift toward using more cavalry units, which were way more expensive to maintain than basic infantry. The financial pressure was just immense. So this leaves us with a final, really fascinating question. The very institution that built the Roman Empire, its disciplined, expansionist, all-powerful military, it eventually became this unsustainable burden that helped tear the whole thing apart. So was the army the architect of Rome's glory, or was it, in the end, the author of its collapse? It's a paradox that lies right at the very heart of the Roman story.